In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Glory to Jesus Christ. Beloved, I've wanted to preach about this topic for a long time. But I did not know the right time, and I also did not know if I should begin with the greatest of virtues. Saint Paisios is a saint of our time, a great saint. He's like an apostle to the modern time. He's like medicine to the modern time. And I cannot think of a better saint to search for and to emulate with regard to the virtues, because he was so open, he was so available in his humility to everyone. So gentle and yet so fierce in his defense of orthodoxy. And so St. Paisios, when I looked to him, I asked, what is the greatest virtue according to St. Paisios? And he actually was very direct in what he said. He said, the greatest virtue is reverence. This is what he said. The greatest virtue is reverence. Reverence is the greatest virtue, he says, because it attracts the grace of God. And he says that the reverence is made of two things. It's made of the fear of God and spiritual sensitivity. He says reverent people behave carefully and modestly because they intensely feel the presence of God. And see, last week I preached about attentiveness. See, this is the real reality of faith, is attentiveness. So when you believe, you become attentive to the reality of what's in front of you. And St. Paisios is talking about those who are reverent feel everything. They feel the power that comes from icons and from everything else. And their soul is attentive to it. And they react to it by showing deference. But reverence it's like a distillation of many good virtues that are mixed together and then purified. Faith is a great virtue because the reverent man believes and he acts upon his belief. The reverent man is humility because he reverences what is greater than himself. He is filled with gratitude, which is the handmaid of humility. The reverent man responds to God's actions with gratitude. Very importantly, he has a very special kind of love. You see, when you love your child, you don't necessarily admire your child. You might admire your child as God's workmanship. But parents don't technically admire their children necessarily. They look down on them with paternalistic love. But you admire something that is greater than yourself. You admire, you are held in awe and in admiration. And this is a very powerful emotion, a very powerful state of being, to have a state of admiration. And the man who is reverent has admiration, and he has love mixed with admiration. But he also has honor. And what I mean when I say honor is the reverent man doesn't place his convenience before reverence. He places God before his conveniences. So he will inconvenience himself for the sake of blessing God and glorifying him. He doesn't make his own comfort something that is very important. Honestly, the best way to talk about reverence is that reverence is respect, value. The person who respects God values what he has, values what he gives, values his holy things. And St. Paisios said reverence is always something of the heart. It always comes out of the heart. It never is a legal thing. It never is an external thing. Reverence springs up from the soul of the man. The man has love of God, and it gives birth to an external reality. This is what he says. And honestly, I know a lot about this because when I was born in Christ, when I was born in our faith, I was born into a very reverent parish. A parish that was incredibly devout. In that parish, no one would even speak in the nave. They would never talk. Because that place was holy. The church was a holy place. This building was a little machine shop. It was not much to look at. When you entered it, it was paradise because the people held everything in such esteem. They had such reverence for the things of God. They could feel God's presence. When you entered this place, it was intense. There was a liturgy I remember where I was praying. I was baptized at the time. And I remember that I felt like the entire church had become one man, as if one soul existed in this church. It was very interesting, very interesting. And this parish was filled with joy. So even if people didn't make a big deal of talking in church, they would be filled with joy. And I remember services in which Vespers would begin in silence and would end in silence. And the silence was so intense that you would leave the church and it would be sitting upon you. You could feel the silence and your thoughts would be quiet. And your heart would be quiet. And you would get into your car and you would drive home. And being a fresh convert, I don't think I understood this very well, nor did I probably appreciate it for what it was. But it was a great thing. I remember one very unfortunate incident that happened in which I had to go to a different church in Montana, a different place. And this church didn't have a regular priest. And so they had a lot of issues. And so I went to this parish early before Orthros, before Matins, to have some icons blessed. And when I was in my church, we wouldn't even talk. We would whisper. You wouldn't even dare to raise your voice in our church because it was so holy. And so I went to this church with icons in my hands to go up to the iconostasis, because the priest was there and was going to offer him these icons to have them blessed. And the priest was this very joyful man, who I think is a good man. I don't think he understood the church in the same way. So this priest comes out and he greets me and he says, "What would you like me to do for you?" And I said, "Could you bless these icons?" And I said this in a soft voice because that was the church I came from. And he says, "Of course I will, but why are you whispering?" And I said, "Oh, not that kind of church. It's a very different kind of church." St. Paisios goes on, he says, in fact, forgive me, I'll give you one more story. I had a roommate in college who was a Protestant, and one day he was very kind of sad, and I said, "Well, come to my church. You have never come to my church, come to my church." And he says, "Okay, I will." And he was very happy. And I took him to my church, and it was Palm Sunday, and for him it was Easter, because the Catholic, Protestant Catholic Easter and our Easter did not combine that year. And so I took him to the church, and a couple days later, he comes to me and he says, "I have to convert." I said, "You went to my church once, what's your problem? I mean, what are you trying to do?" And he said, "Well, I need to tell you some things." And he said, "When I entered your church," it's a teeny church, maybe even half the size of this room, very small. When he entered the narthex, it was the narthex, he would not have known that, but it was the narthex. He says, "When I entered the narthex, I felt power envelop me. Power seized me, and I've never felt anything like it. And your priest saw me, and he knew that I was probably your roommate, so he came and shook my hand, and as soon as your priest touched me, I felt this jolt of power come into me." And he says, "I have to convert." Now he's Orthodox, and he's married in the church, and he's attending a parish in Washington. But that's what my parish was like. It was that intense. The more reverent someone becomes, the more this virtue is cultivated, the more God's grace will touch and illumine that person. St. Paisios respected reverence so much that if he knew a man was reverent, and I don't mean outwardly, I mean he knew the man had a reverent heart. If someone brought an accusation against that man, St. Paisios would say, "I don't know about that. I don't know. He's reverent. Reverend people don't do that kind of thing. I don't believe this yet. I'm not going to say anything." And actually, St. Paisios says, those who are reverent, God will guard them. Because what does it say in the Psalms? The Lord will guard those who reverence him. And St. Paisios says, this is true. It's literal. God will guard the steps of those who reverence him. One time a bishop came to St. Paisios, a Russian bishop, and he said, "Who should I ordain? I have many candidates for the priesthood. Who should I lay hands on?" He said, "Only those who are reverent and those who are pure." Only reverent and pure men. St. Paisios says, the grace of God comes to reverent people and makes the soul beautiful. If a person is not reverent, however, if he scorns divine things, grace abandons him, and he's overcome by temptations and becomes like the devil. Divine grace will not come to an irreverent person, is what he says. It comes to people who honor it, who value it, and respect it. I'm not a holy man, and I'm not an exceptionally reverent one, but I can say what he's saying is true, because I've been there. And I've seen reverent churches, and I've seen churches that are the exact opposite. I've seen churches that are horrifying. I've seen churches that you could call it sacrilege if you wanted to, but it would be devastating to be there. Beloved, they say that the soul of a priest is in travail until the life of Christ is born in the hearts of his children. What I would say to you, beloved, is become more reverent. I'm going to mandate some things. Don't talk in the nave anymore. Don't talk in the narthex anymore. These places are holy. The nave is a holy place. The nave does not belong to us, it belongs to Christ. The nave is like the place outside of his tomb. Would you go to the outside of the tomb and talk there? No, you would not. The nave is holy. It's very holy. Don't speak unnecessarily unless you have to. Be quiet in the nave. Don't make the nave a common place of conversation. That's not what it is. It's not a cafe. Don't talk here unless you actually have to. In our church, we'd whisper if we had to say something. If I had to say, where do I put this icon? Where do I move this chair? What do I do? Then we'd whisper. We'd never even talk in this place. This place is so holy. The narthex is holy. You can see, even my roommate was converted just by being in the narthex. The narthex is holy. The narthex is the acclamation chamber. It's the chamber for the unbelievers, those who are not ready to be Christians. They're there acclimating to the life of Christ. But for the Christian, the narthex is the place he comes into to leave the world behind. He lets the world go, and he quiets himself in the narthex, and then he enters the church. And so the narthex should be a very quiet place, because if the narthex is loud, if a man is loud in the narthex, he'll be loud in the church. If a man is quiet in the narthex, he'll be quiet in the nave, and he'll have peace. And if visitors come, the people in the safety team should greet them peacefully, with a soft voice. Not with a whisper, with a soft voice, and with so much joy. So they'll realize this is a soft place, this is a quiet place. Beloved, the building of the church is so holy because Christ is here. You were very reverent when the epitaph was brought out on Holy Friday. But you need to understand some things. You need to think with your mind's eye that the epitaphium is always on the altar, except not the icon, the real thing. Christ is always on the altar. Always, always, always. Right now he is. And during the Divine Liturgy, more so than ever. St. John Chrysostom, our Father, he says that when the liturgy is served, Christ is laid out with blood and everything. Blood, flesh, everything is laid out, as if he's been crucified and he's lying there. St. Ephraim of Katonakia, this massive priest, he was the son of Joseph, Hezekiah's spiritual son, brother to Elder Ephraim. He said, many times when I served liturgy, I saw a body on the altar. Many times. God would give me this grace. The altar is literally Golgotha. The altar is literally the tomb in which Christ was buried and he rose again. And the altar is also his throne. It's his throne room. And it doesn't matter whether the doors are closed, whether the doors are open. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether a service is going, whether a service isn't going, whether I'm here, whether I'm not here. Christ is here in absolute power. Absolutely, he's here. And if you do not believe this, you're not Orthodox. If you do believe it, you are. God bless you. But now you have to live it. You actually have to fulfill what you know to be true. Beloved, there's nothing allegorical in the church at all. Nothing. There are symbols, there are allegories, there are all kinds of things that point to higher meanings. But the literal truth is always here, as I said last week. Beloved, I'm going to say a few things about the church. When you come to the church, you should bow outside the narthex. You should prepare yourself as you're coming into the narthex. You should bow once or even 3 times and say, Lord, forgive me. Lord, cleanse me. When you come to the narthex, you should be quiet and you should venerate the icon. Take off your coat, do what you need to do. And before you enter the nave, always bow 3 times. Never enter the nave without bowing 3 times. The first time. If you have to make many, many trips, that's different. The first time you bow 3 times, always, all the way to the ground, you say, God, cleanse me a sinner and have mercy upon me. God, cleanse me a sinner and have mercy upon me. God, cleanse me a sinner and have mercy upon me. Or you say the Jesus prayer. And after you've entered the nave, in the quietness of your soul, venerate all the icons as living people, because that's what they represent. Very reverently, very slowly, not quickly. So you should come to church so you have the time to venerate all the icons with reverence. And after you've done this, you should find your place, and you should stand there. Children move, that's true. Parents have to do the best they can do always. Parents always have to struggle. But you should try to be in the church before you hear blesses the kingdom, because this is very important. This is when the life of Christ starts. Don't light candles after blesses the kingdom. Don't light any more candles. Find your place and stand there. Light candles during the hours, light candles during matins, but don't light candles during the liturgy. Once the liturgy is started, you should never light candles anymore. That time is done. Unless we go to the nave unless we go to the narthex for a litany, you can light candles then, but during the liturgy itself, don't. Stand with deep reverence. When the gospel comes out, the gospel is one of the greatest things there is. It is one of the greatest icons of the church. So when the deacon comes out carrying the gospel, everyone should bow, everyone should stand with absolute fear, because the gospel is so holy. It is literally the life of Christ itself. And when the ecumenical council would be held, they would put the gospel in the middle of the council and they would say, Christ is here. This is Christ, literally, because these are the words of his life. And so when the gospel is brought out, everyone should bow and everyone should stand really straight until the deacon lays it down on the table again. When the epistle is read, beloved, you should have such awe, because this book could be called the book of blood. Because all the men who wrote in this book lost blood for the sake of Christ. All of them. They were all tortured. And most of them died in horrendous, awful ways. Except John the theologian, and even he was tortured badly for the sake of Christ. And so when their words are read, no one should be looking at bulletins or looking at things. You should be fixated upon the epistle book with deep reverence and realize what this is. This is holy. These words are holy. And you should love these words and do whatever they say. When the gospel comes out, this is something, again, great. The gospel is beyond everything. The gospel is greater than the universe. What does Christ say? He says, this world and heaven and earth will pass away. They will be no more. But my words will never, ever pass away. And so his words are greater than all the universe together, everything. The words of Christ make the universe spin, and the universe stops for his words. His words don't stop for anything, but the universe stops by his word alone. And so when the deacon stands up to read, every person should be fixed on the deacon. People shouldn't have their faces buried in anything. They should be gazing at him. Or if they're very contrite, they should bow like they do in Russia. And in Romania, they even kneel, because they say no man can listen to the gospel except kneeling. And when the deacon reads, it's not like some man reading. It's not. The deacon is a man pulled out of all of humanity. He's chosen specially out of all of humanity, and God gives him a special grace, and he says, you will be the one to read the gospel. Because even if the bishop is here, the deacon reads the gospel. But if a deacon or a priest or a bishop reads, someone reads with authority, with power. And so this is a mystery. This is a great thing. This is a very powerful thing when a clergyman reads. It's not just like reading the gospel at home. It's a powerful thing. And the deacon should read with great reverence, because this is when his ministry shines more than it ever does. In this moment. Beloved, When the great entrance happens, you should be very alert and alive. In fact, I was reading a medieval commentary in which it says that people should prostrate on the floor during this time. I'm not sure if they meant even on Sunday, and they said you should beg the priest to pray for you. You should beg Christ to cover you with his sacrifice. You should think that this is like Christ going to Golgotha. He's being carried towards Golgotha, and you're asking him, saying, may your sacrifice cover me. May this sacrifice that's about to happen cover me. May it cover my children. May it cover my house. May my sins be blotted out. So when people are touching the priest, they're touching, in a sense, they're touching Christ. They're saying, oh Lord, take away my sins. Take away all the problems that I have. Save me. I have infirmities. I have troubles. I have agonies. I have sins. Deliver me from them. It's also like the woman with the issue of blood who touches the hem of Christ's robe and she's healed. And so honestly, there are churches where people kneel. If you go to Romania, people kneel even on Sunday for the great entrance. Certainly you should do it on a weekday, perhaps not on Sunday. But you should be very, very reverent. Very, 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 very devout. As soon as the consecration happens, beloved, your eyes should never leave the chalice again. Because there's Christ. Immolated for your sake, cut up for your sake, bleeding for your sake. And so after the consecration, all eyes should be fixed on the altar. They should be fixated there. People should be gazing with worship, with adoration, with longing. And when the deacon brings out the cup, everyone should bow very low. And if it was a weekday, prostration, prostration. When you hear the words, the holy things are for the holy, that comes before. If this was a weekday, prostration, prostration all the way to the floor. If it's not a feast of the Lord, prostration. All right, you should be filled with fear, because this is the moment that Christ is lifted up. This is when the priest lifts him up, and he is then broken at this moment. Beloved, when the chalice comes out, this is Christ himself. So no one should ever turn their back on the chalice, ever. No one should talk when the chalice is out. You shouldn't talk in the nave anyway, but you should definitely not talk now, because this is Christ himself. So when you receive communion, you should leave, you should step to the side, partake of the antiteron and zapivka, and then you should find your place and immediately face him again. Don't ever have your back to Christ. Don't ever talk. This is a sin. It's a great sin. Christ himself is present. You should be reverent, with absolute reverence, absolute love. If you're irreverent at this time, it means you don't love Christ, or you don't believe in him. And these are both dreadful things. Beloved, you should be fixated on the chalice until the moment that the chalice is taken to the table of oblation. So even when I bring it back into the altar and put it back on the altar, you should still be gazing at it with worship, with love. And I will present it to you one last time for you to worship Christ. One last time, when I say always, now and ever, unto ages of ages, the people should bow again and worship. And if you haven't communed, do a prostration if it's a weekday. Beloved, after this is done, you need to be very strict with yourself when we give thanks. Because you know what? Who loves ungrateful people? No one does. No one likes an ungrateful man. We denigrate ungrateful people. When we hear about an ungrateful man, we feel it's repulsive to us. We feel wretched. We even listen to stories about ungrateful people. And yet, to show gratitude to Christ is the worst thing in the world, the most awful thing. Abba Isaac the Syrian says the only gift that God will not add to is the one that is left unthanked. And so when the prayers of thanksgiving are read, no one should ever talk, ever. Even if you didn't commune, don't talk. Why? Because you should give thanks to God for even allowing you to be here. And not only that, you should listen, because this will teach you how you should give thanks when you do become a communicant. God willing. Beloved, I even read this book written by a Catholic bishop who, talking about how priests should act, he said that when the service is done, the priest should take his vestments off and he should stand in front of the altar for 1 hour, giving thanks to God. He said, this is great. He said, if a man must leave at 45 minutes, this is also good. He said, and if a priest is very rushed, he said, I'll let him do half an hour. But anything less than that is a sin. It's wrong. And this man is a heretic. And yet he says people should give thanks with such intensity. St. John Chrysostom says our thanksgiving ends only when we go to sleep that night. It's all throughout the day. And so this is the spirit you should take with you when you go and leave the church. Beloved, the trapeza is your place. It's our place. The trapeza is an apostolic place. It's a very important place. From apostolic times onward, it's a very important place. It's a place that people go to share Christ, to share the joy they've just had, to share the love of their community and their unity in Christ, to have the communion now of fellowship. And so the trapeza is very important. People should go there. And people should spend time there. People should hug and kiss each other, and they should spend time eating and drinking and enjoying each other's company in love. They should share the peace that Christ has given to them. The trapeza is a blessed place. It's a holy place. And we should be in there, and we should be venerated, and we should have the joy of this place. Beloved, be reverent for the sake of your children, because how will they ever know what the church is unless you model it? People can say whatever they want to say about the church, but children will listen to what you model. They'll see what you do. Right? If you're quiet, they will learn that they must be quiet. And if you're reverent and you act with piety, they'll realize this is what they should do also. But if a man acts foolishly, they'll say, Father doesn't act any differently in the church than he does in his own living room. The church may as well be his living room, so there is no difference. Right, what a dreadful thing, right? What a dreadful reality that would be. Beloved, don't lessen the dignity of the Holy Church, except you can't. See, the truth is we can't lessen the dignity of the church because the dignity comes from God. And so this can never be lessened no matter how evil a man is. But the only thing men can do is two things. They can either recognize the dignity or they can deny it. And so I'd recommend that we recognize the dignity of God very intensely. And we dwell in it, and we value it, and we nurture it, and we cultivate it. Because that will be unto our salvation. Beloved, don't judge. Don't judge people. Because the problem is the man who judges is immediately the most irreverent person in the room. Always, always, always. Because reverence comes from the heart. The moment you judge, you become the worst person in the room. Even if the other person is irreverent, you cannot judge them. You must pray for them. And the moment you give up on your own reverence to look at others, you have left aside the worship of God. You've left aside the work that Christ has given you to have. Beloved, treat the church with a lot of respect. Be much more respectful in church. It is a fearsome place. Saint Gabriel of Georgia, this recent saint, he said, if you understood what happens during the liturgy, he said you would take your hands, gather up the dust on the floor, and wash your face in it. Because that's how much grace is poured out in the church when we offer Christ up. We're not offering animals, we're offering Christ himself. There is nothing more holy than this. The liturgy is the most holy act in the entire world. There is nothing more holy than this. And the house in which it is offered is a great place. There is no building like this place in the entire world, except another church. And someone might say, what about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre? Yes, indeed. That is a special church, a special, graceful church. But the body of Christ is also physically present here too. It is also here. This is Golgotha. This is the tomb. This is paradise. You have to believe this, and you have to live like it, and you have to understand it. Beloved, Christ is in all churches. Every Orthodox church has Christ, but not all of them treat him the same. Not all of them treat him with the same love. They are very different. Some churches are like heaven, and some churches are not. This church should become like heaven. Heaven is already here. This is what our faith gives to us. Heaven is here already. Christ has come to us and has given us paradise already. We should act like it. Amen.